Hi nurse friends, it's me Nikki again, and today I'm going to share with you 3 key points about cultural humility and how it differs from cultural competency. I'm going to highlight those differences and then give you some practical tools that you can walk away with today. So exciting, right? But first, if we've never met, I am the creative director of Transform Nursing, an organization with the mission of training nurses globally to confidently address health policy, social justice, and health equity through a dynamic leadership approach. And the approach that I use is the Nurses Influential Leadership Lab, which is a course that is coming soon, and I'm super excited about it. I use a lot of different tactics to really keep people engaged. As you can tell, I kind of like to talk to folk. I like to teach. I use coaching strategy. I use live discussion. I use innovative models, hybrid coursework, just because I think these tools and resources are things that are going to make you and your organization more inclusive and responsive. I guarantee you that you will gain emotional intelligence, you'll improve your work culture, and most importantly, you're going to learn about the importance of civic engagement, which is really what I like to think of as being invested in the community that you serve. And it helps you also to develop new knowledge, skills, and values about that community. So if you can hear me, hit like, and if you like what I'm saying, give me a heart or give me a wow. I really like that. And then please leave comments in the comments section if you find this beneficial, and then share with other nurses and tag them and let them know, hey, I think this is kind of awesome. So I love to learn more about my audience. Also, please share with me where you're tuning in from. I love to hear about what you're doing and how nursing is working where you are. So whether you're watching the live or the rebroadcast, I do come back on later and I view your comments and I respond. So if you're interested in subscribing, please click on the link that I'm going to leave in the comments section so that you can learn more about what I do. And as a gift for you subscribing, I'm actually going to give you a wonderful podcast by a nurse who, oh, hi DeMarcus, so good to see you on. Thank you. If you do wish to subscribe, I'm going to give you a podcast by a fabulous nurse who, hey Shannon, good to see you too, who is going to share with us a little bit about what she did to really shift the conversation in the Baltimore City public school system, because there was one kid that was really struggling and she stood up against the whole school system and said, we need more. And I'm going to share with you how she actually got herself on the news, which I think is pretty powerful. Thank you. The link is actually there now. So if you get a chance and if you want to subscribe, you are more than welcome to subscribe. Hi, Shannon. So before I even start anything, I do want to share with you about 2 important events that are coming up. And these events are actually being sponsored by Nurses for Justice Baltimore, in addition to other organizations here in Baltimore City. The first one is the Baltimore Harm Reduction, or the Harm Reduction Advocacy Day, and it's going to be in Annapolis. And it's going to be at the Maryland House of Delegates in Annapolis. So I just want you to know, we need to hear your voice in Annapolis, okay? So if you're interested in learning more about advocacy, and if you want to learn more about what it means to be a part of the legislative process, and if you want to get lunch, get trained, meet your elected officials, this is a great opportunity for you to do that. So that's Wednesday, March 7th from 9 to 3 p.m. at the Maryland House of Delegates in Annapolis. And there's another event that the Nurses for Justice is also co-partnering, and that one is phone banking. How exciting. That's something that I've wanted to do for a while now. So I'm kind of looking forward to phone banking and quilting in support of the Baltimore Housing Roundtable 2020. And that's happening on Tuesday, March 13th from 6 to 8 p.m. For both of those events, you can go to the Nurses for Justice Facebook page and you'll find more information about both of those. But are you guys ready to talk about our topic today, which is cultural competency? Great. All right. So how many folks have had cultural competency training? Just want to get an idea. How many have had cultural competency trainings? Thank you for my hearts. Thank you for my wows. I appreciate it. Well, I wanted to share with you about a story that happened to me when I was practicing as a nurse on the floor. And I remember it like it was yesterday, because it was just one of those things that doesn't really ever leave you. I was working with a nurse and I was coming on my shift. We were doing report and she was telling me about her patient. And she said, yeah, my patient's name is Jemima. And she said, and I call her Aunt Jemima. And I was like, well, why? And she said, because the patient said that it was okay. And I remember my mouth dropping on the inside, and then I like pushed it back up on the inside and like got my face together. And I'm just like, that's so strange that that would be a part of what we're talking about today in nursing. I just didn't think that that was going to happen like in a real life situation. So what I want to do is I want to unpack this a little bit because it's really important to the work of cultural humility, okay? Or cultural competency. Which one do you think that you practice? So if you've never heard of the story of Aunt Jemima, it is a big part of American history. So I want to share with you her story. And the R.T. Davis Milling Company hired former slave Nancy Green as a spokesperson for the Aunt Jemima pancake mix in 1890. And Nancy Green was born in Montgomery County, Kentucky, played the Jemima character from 1890 until her death in 1923 of September. I want to share with you some of the imagery so that you can get an idea and perspective for how calling someone Aunt Jemima, whose name is Jemima, could be potentially harmful. Want to show this to you if you've never seen this before. This is the Aunt Jemima imagery. And as you can see, this is imagery that's from, hi Michaela, great to see you on. This is imagery of Aunt Jemima from 1910 through 1980s. And for those that are just tuning in, what I'm sharing about is a story that happened to me when I was working on the floor as a nurse with a nurse who actually said she was calling her patient Aunt Jemima. And I wanted to share about the history of Aunt Jemima in American history. So without further ado, this is the imagery that was portrayed. And the actor that was portraying Aunt Jemima, we can see that her look evolved over time, right? The character of Aunt Jemima started out in minstrel shows following the Civil War as a female counterpart to the Uncle Tom character. And if you don't know about Uncle Tom, definitely look him up as well. And the Jemima character was an obese mammy stereotype exemplifying the happy cook on the plantation during slavery. And before the turn of the 20th century, Aunt Jemima was placed on pancake boxes involving happy morning memories for many 1950s baby boomers and a collection mania for Aunt Jemima inspired kitchenware. That's incredible. And it wasn't until fairly recently in the 1980s that the Aunt Jemima breakfast image put the headscarf down and donned pearls and more matronly coif to represent a more modern, if still politically incorrect woman. So you can see that, right? This is the imagery that we have. So when this nurse actually said that she was calling her patient, whose name was Jemima, and she was actually calling her Aunt Jemima, and this is the imagery that was representing Jemima in American history, the Aunt Jemima, you can see that there's a clear difference, right, between these. And so I wanted you to know that that's what flashed in my mind when she first said that. So cultural humility is a really powerful thing, and it's something that we have to talk about and think about. The first thing I want to talk about is languaging. When you heard what I said, if you listened, the R.T. Davis Milling Company hired this former slave, Nancy Green. Slaves were not hired. So, what's with that language, right? We have to be really mindful. But without the lens of cultural humility, I might not even catch on to that fact. Hi, Janelia. Good to see you on. Janelia is from Trinidad. Yay, Trinidad's in the house. I'm excited. And so without knowing what the languaging is about and really understanding humility, it can be very difficult sometimes to grasp what's really actually happening. And some people can argue that what this nurse said was really a harmless act. There was no physical harm, that had happened to this patient, right? Oh, hi, Mom. So there was no physical harm that happened to this patient as a result of being called Aunt Jemima by a nurse. And the nurse said that the patient gave her permission to do that. However, what we do have to realize is that physical harm is not the end of harm, right? Like we know that there's emotional and there's mental and there's all these different processes that happens with patients. And my wondering always goes back to what happens when we say things to patients and that causes them not to feel comfortable enough to come back to receive care from us? Does that matter? I certainly hope that it does. And I want to share a couple of stories about from the perspective of a blogger who is an author and consultant, and she talks about cultural competency, and she talks about times in history where just not understanding and not having that humility was really a challenge. And one time there was a Latino patient whose family brought him in and used the word intoxicado because his head was bothering him, and the physicians didn't just assume that it meant that he was drunk and didn't really do the full range of testing, sort of just put him in the bed, when it turns out that he'd had a brain bleed. And had the imaging been done, he would have been able to, probably live his life to a greater level of, capacity. And another is a story of a Japanese man who didn't sound worried. He didn't sound worried on the phone when she was talking about her daughter. And so they just sort of said, just bring her in a couple of days, make an appointment. But by the time the appointment came, her child had actually died. So those are some drastic, kind of impacts. Let's talk about smaller impacts. Well, a smaller impact, I would say, is where there's a common perception that African Americans and Latinos don't really require as much pain medication, right? Which means that they are in more pain for the same, illness coming in as others are. And, it's just a perception. It's a perception, but perceptions don't hurt, right? Perceptions don't cause harm. Well, I beg to differ. So let me tell you the difference between cultural competency and cultural humility, all right? Cultural humility is knowing how to function in the midst of cultural differences. Competency implies that you have to obtain a certain skill set and that there is an endpoint in teachable actions that will transpire into a culturally competent person. So that's essentially what it is. It's about developing a competency, and once you have it, you're good to go. Okay. Cultural humility is necessary for all nurses in order to provide the best quality patient care. And cultural humility is a lifelong process of self-reflection and self-critique, which allows nurses to examine differences and similarities between their own beliefs, values, and healthcare goals with those of their patients. Can you hear the difference in these two definitions? So cultural competency, about a skill set, something that in nursing is very common. We talk about skill sets a lot. We talk about, nurses being competent to practice, whereas humility is this lifelong self-critique and reflection of who you are and your values in relations to others. And I can tell you in my hospital orientation, I remember that what we learned about cultural competency, again, was the fact that African American patients probably won't ask you for as much pain medication. Now, whether that's true or not, thank you from my heart, whether that's true or not, that remains to be seen. And there's probably more research out about it. But the fact that the perception is there, that this is what you need to share with people, and that's your level of competency and cultural competency, is really a challenge to me. Because culture is not easily definable, right? It's not narrow. It's really wide, right? Your culture is amorphous. It's without shape. We are members of many different cultural, types of roles, and our lives are framed and shaped in so many different ways. And I've learned since that time a lot more about how healthcare professionals think about cultural competency training. And according to an article by NPR, the traditional cultural competency trainings of the 80s and 90s just weren't working. Quote, people who seem to have aha moments, particularly people in the dominant group, later actually felt quite wounded by the experience. Sometimes participants seemed to become more defensive and harden in their biases after those early trainings, not less prejudiced. Now, these are traditional cultural competency trainings. Again, these are trainings where we're trying to identify and measure, and we're testing, right? Because a competency means that we're sort of testing you. So people felt some type of way, for lack of better words. But my question to you is, do you think this has improved? Do you think folk are now more invested in diversity trainings than before, especially when they're traditional? Well, another study, according to the Harvard Business Review a few years ago, examined cultural competency training at more than 800 companies over 30 years, and the results showed about the same thing, that these trainings seem to do nothing to change people's prejudices or improve diversity. Now, that's critical. Instead, in many cases, they actually reinforce bias. And that's something that we don't want to do, right? So my wondering to you is, what do we need to do differently? How do we make this be a place where people feel welcome and people feel like they are able to participate and learn about cultural humility? I think cultural humility is the key. I think it's the way to go because it's a lifelong self-reflection, right? What's better than like self-reflection when it comes to learning about culture? It allows room for not knowing and being able to admit that you don't know. And then there's a humility in it that says, even if I don't know, I get to learn. Okay. And it allows place for discomfort for nurses, sometimes who want to know it all. Like, that's the thing about nursing. We are trained to know it all. And we get very uncomfortable the moment we feel like we don't know everything about a patient or where they come from. But the truth is we cannot, right? Because we are all multicultural folk. We are all multicultural beings. And we have learned also in nursing and in healthcare that just increasing standards is really not going to be the end all of all. It's a very common practice. We think that sometimes by increasing the rigor, that we're going to change something, but it doesn't reverse this epidemic of bias in healthcare, right? So that's why these 3 points that I'm about to share with you are going to be really important if you really want to shift that conversation with your patients, if you really want to engage your patients on a deeper level, if you really want to see health system-wide change. These are some things that you can do to increase your own cultural humility, right? And remember, you can subscribe as well. The link has been posted. So if you want to subscribe to my content, subscribe to my course that's coming soon, please click that link and you will get that free podcast that's sharing with you about this amazing nurse who learned all about cultural humility and helped a struggling kid in the Baltimore City public school system. So the first tool that I want to identify that you can use to increase your own cultural humility is assess. Okay, very familiar word for nurses, right? Assess your own multidimensional culture and background. So assess yourself as mom or as husband or as wife or as coworker, as nurse, as student. How do all of these different roles inform your own culture? And then as you think about that, give yourself space to allow your patients to be the same. Let them be multicultural as well. It's very difficult for a patient to come into a space and the patient is coming in and they're in a gown and you're in clothes, so immediately there's that power imbalance. So just allow folk to feel like they are part of the story. That's right. Cultural divide. It totally happens. Thanks for that comment. Yes, it can divide folk, but our goal is to be able to understand and to be able to relate to our patients. So we want to be able to assess that we're from a multicultural background and so are they. The second thing that you can do to improve your own cultural humility is to attempt new behaviors that promote cultural humility. And one simple practice that I can think of that you can start even today is notice, and I mean really just notice that when you're talking to your patients, you're having these interactions with them, notice if you're the one that's driving that conversation. Okay, notice if you're the one that's asking all the questions, doing most of the work, doing most of the talking. If you're doing most of the talking, chances are you're doing less listening, right? So you want to shift that. So that power imbalance, you get a little bit more of a balance with that patient so they don't feel so much like they're just sort of not really a part of the process. You want your patients to feel a part of that process, right? Awesome. And the third thing that I want to share that will increase your own cultural humility is and this is my favorite one of all, is to engage in culturally immersive experiences. All right. So a lot of folk think when I say cultural immersion, when you hear cultural immersion, what do you think? You think, oh, I'm going to travel abroad. I'm going to go to another country. I'm going to learn all about how another culture perceives themselves and how they do things. No, that's not what I'm saying. Feel free to do that. However, you don't have to travel very far because we all live in places and spaces where there are different cultural groups, right? So what I'm asking and inviting you to do is to go somewhere a little bit unfamiliar to yourself. Engage with a group of folk that you typically wouldn't necessarily engage with. Volunteer to do something that you wouldn't ordinarily do. So if that means that you're going to participate in like a food pantry, or if you're going to volunteer at a shelter, or if you're going to be a part of a clinic that is supporting folk who are mentally health challenged and who are also from underserved communities, whatever it looks like for you, whatever drives you, whatever motivates you, find an experience that's going to be immersing you in something that's different from yourself, and then grapple with the discomfort. Okay, grapple with the sense of I feel off balance, I don't feel safe, I don't feel comfortable. Then begin to develop an appreciation, and that's where the humility really starts to root in. That's where it sets in. And all of this starts really with setting the tone as nurses that we are willing to do this work. We are willing to be humble, right? We are willing to engage folk and to really invite them into our space and then ask permission to be invited into theirs. Okay, so this is about building that relationship with your patient, all right? And I wanted to share with you a quote from our past president. I usually have Barack Obama on my wall. I took him down for a moment because I was trying something new, but he's here with me. And this quote is, I think, just really important to the way that we think about humility. And he said, "The best way to not feel hopeless is to get up and do something. Don't wait for good things to happen to you. If you go out and make some good things happen, you will fill the world with hope, and you will fill yourself with hope." All right? So again, my course, the Nurses Influential Leadership Lab, is just the step-by-step approach that I think that you need to help you utilize these strategies and processes to express cultural humility. I teach you how to regularly attempt new behaviors with support, how to provide strategies to get you unstuck, and how to use cultural humility as a patient advocacy tool. And that's just some of it. Are any of my students on live today? Well, I know that there's one student here, definitely that's on live. I just want to share some of the feedback from my students before, and it gets me excited because they're saying that they feel more comfortable providing nursing care with patients from diverse cultural backgrounds, that they have an increase in self-awareness of their own values and beliefs, and a strong feeling of gratitude. Like, that's awesome. So exciting to me. Most importantly, nurses are learning that this is a lifelong process, right? We don't just get to go to school and learn this stuff. As a matter of fact, we don't necessarily learn cultural humility in school. This is a different process, but it's something that you can take everywhere that you go. I hope that you enjoyed listening today as much as I enjoyed sharing. Please subscribe by clicking in the link that will link you directly to that podcast so that you can hear how nurses are doing this work. Young nurses, and when I say young, I'm not talking age-wise. I'm talking nurses who are new into the field, who are brand new, who are coming in, hitting the ground running, and taking on a lot because they're seeing this disparity and they want to do something about it. So check out this podcast by Kendall Sharkey. She's a Johns Hopkins nursing student in her DNP program, and she's going to share with you exactly what she did in the Baltimore City school system to really help advocate for a young man, and how she got herself on the news as a result. So I think her story will inspire you. I hope that this has inspired you as well, as much as it has inspired me to share it with you. And I hope that this hope gives you hope so that you can fill the world as well. All right. Thanks everybody for being on live. Again, please share with other people. If you see the link again that's posted here below. Share with other people if you like this. Tag them, let them know, let other nurses know that I'm out here doing this work and I'm doing it for you. Share your feedback. I love to hear your feedback. I'm always open. I always want to learn something new and I want to learn from you. So please share with me. Thanks everybody. Have a happy Sunday. It is beautiful here in Baltimore. I'm super excited for this wonderful sunshiny weather and I hope the sun is shining wherever you are today as well. Take care everybody.